talk a little bit about Chisholm and Patsy Brown. Patsy Brown was the daughter of Captain John Brown, who was a half-blood and a full-blooded Cherokee mother. She was a sister of Colonel Richard Brown of Gunners. Now, Gunners was established by John Gunner, and it's the town of Gunners is now the town of Gunnersville. And Richard Brown had a big village on Browns Creek. And Browns Creek is still, if you go to Gunnersville, you cross, I think it's on 67, you'll still cross Browns Creek. That's the valley that, and John Brown, Chisholm tried to get Richard Brown to go with him to England, and he refused. He told him he wasn't going over there. I guess he had heard too many wild tales. But anyway, Tuluntuski left here in well, it was really the permits were given in January and February 1810. Some folks say 1809. I believe it's going to be 1810. The Chickasaws wanted his head. They wanted to kill him. They said, if you don't get him out of our country, we'll take him out for you. He was wounded at one time, we know, because he couldn't go and talk to Return J. Meigs because he said he was recovering. But anyway, he goes west in 1809 to avoid assassination from both the Cherokees and Chickasaws, because the upper faction, he was helping control the lower faction. The upper faction hated the lower faction because they were controlling all the money. He became a leader of the old settlers in the West and actually represented them in Washington. But on March the 5th, 1818, John D. Chisholm was back in Lauderdale County, where he reclaimed some 1,320 acres of Cherokee land in Double Heads Reserve. Now, I don't know if while he was living there, if the Mary that's buried next to him is his wife, but at that time, he was married to a Mary. He had been married at least 4 times. Now, he had a son, James Chisholm, that they tried to run out of the Cherokee Nation because he was pretty much a thug, from what I understand. And General Armstead tried to arrest him. We'll talk about that in a minute. But John died in Lauderdale County on October 9th, 1828. He's buried in the Chisholm Family Cemetery 5 miles north of Florence. And his wife, Mary, like I say, I'm not sure whether she was Cherokee or not, but he had a lot of Cherokee connections. You notice that he had a son, Ignace, that married Old Tassel's daughter, and he had a grandson from that marriage that blazed the famous Chisholm Trail to the west. That's John D. Chisholm, his son, that's buried next to him at the little cemetery on Chisholm Road. And the Chisholm Road, of course, was named in his honor. We're talking about the Brown, Patsy Brown. Captain John Brown was her father. He also lived in Lawrence County. He was a half-blood, and he run the Browns Ferry in Lawrence County prior to moving to Otali. And Otali in Cherokee means end of mountain. And Otali is right at the end of the south end of Lookout Mountain. Chattanooga is on the north end of Lookout Mountain. So there's 2 ends of the mountain. Captain John Brown was married 3 times. One of those marriages, he had a stepdaughter named Betsy who married Joshua Cox. Joshua Cox entered the land. I've got the dates he entered it, and I've got a historical record that shows that he actually run the ferry, and it was called Cox's Ferry for a short period of time. Then Bryce M. Garner come in from Fayetteville, Tennessee. He bought the same property and called it Garner's Ferry, but the ferry reverted back to the original name Brown's Ferry. And we know that the Brown's Ferry was there at the time of the Battle of Talladega in 1813, because when Joseph Brown, Reverend Joseph Brown, he was a colonel too, he came into Lawrence County, and he come in to retrieve the slaves of his father that Cuttertoy had killed. Now I want you to look at this. This is the road bank. There's a bank of the tree. This old road hadn't been used. It's actually on TVA property since TVA has been organized. Dr. Charles Borden and I, we're heading to the Tennessee River. That light right there is the Tennessee River. Right straight across the river is Browns Ferry Nuclear Plant. This is the road that went from Hunt Spring to Gorge Settlement. John Hunt settled that by 1807. James Ditto was in Madison County by 1807. James Ditto established a landing on both the Morgan County and the Madison County side of the Tennessee River. Okay, Browns Ferry, of course, we've talked a little bit about it. That was where the stronghold of Double Head was, and he finally signed a treaty of peace on June 26, 1794. And about 1802, he relocated near the east mouth of Blue Water Creek, where he had a a trading post. And some people say, how do you know he had a trading post? Because there's two people that in affidavits said that, of course, Bird Doublehead said that my father would trade goods to the Indians and the other people, and then what he had left over, he would put him into his trading post at the mouth of Blue Water Creek. But anyway, this is the Colonel Joseph Brown I was talking about. His father was killed on May the 9th, 1788. He also had two brothers that were killed. He was 15 years old at the time. They didn't kill him. Cataloochee, who was one of the Cherokee people there, claimed him as his slave, okay? Carried him back to the upper towns of the lower towns of Dragon Canoe around Nickajack, and he escaped. And when he escaped, Colonel Brown came back to those areas and destroyed those towns of Dragon Canoe. Tell you another little thing about Joseph Brown. He come back here after the battle. He was in the Battle of Talladega. He goes to Andrew Jackson. He says, I want some of your best men. I want to go get my father's slaves that were taken by Cutatoy. And he knew where they were at. They were on Gilchrist, what was called Cutatoy's Island, but it was Gilchrist Island on the Tennessee River. It became owned by Malcolm Gilchrist. But anyway, he comes back here with 10 of Jackson's best men. They stay at Cutatoy's Lodge that night. The next day they get up. They put Cutatoy's wife behind them and the slaves, and they ford the river on the east side of Elk River, where about the same place General Wheeler crossed the river in October 1863. What happens? Cutatoy and his men go up the river and they cross on a large ferry, and that ferry is Brown's Ferry that was there in 1813. Ann Newport Royal wrote about Brown's Ferry in 1818, where she visited a camp of 300 Cherokees near Brown's Ferry on their way west. And in April 23, 1863, Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest's cavalry crossed the Tennessee River at Brown's Ferry. So Brown's Ferry was a very important Indian route. It was an Indian road because the road was here while it was still Indian country. Go to the next one. Pumpkin Boy was another brother for sure of Doublehead. And in 1793, during the Chickamauga War, they were going to attack Knoxville. And he was shot by John Severe's men during an encounter at Ishii Station. His daughter, he and his wife was Cherokee, he was Cherokee. They had one daughter, Catherine Spencer, that was full-blooded Cherokee. She lived with Doublehead, her uncle Doublehead, after her daddy was killed, at Doublehead's town, which was located across from Brown's Ferry, and at Shoaltown. Now, in other words, she didn't live at Shoaltown but 5 years until Doublehead was assassinated. And she was living with him, she said in her affidavit, when he was assassinated. She gave her testimony on June 8, 1838. The government took testimony about Doublehead. She stated she was 19 years old. Really, if you look at the time period, she actually stayed with Doublehead 14 years because of the time that Pumpkin Boy was killed until 1807 when Doublehead was killed. She knew Doublehead's black slaves were named. She knew Doublehead's double son-in-law Samuel Riley, who run the Southwest Point Ferry, and she mentions him by name. She talks about the trading post and the white man Phillips who ran it. She talks about a lot of other things. You have to read that affidavit in detail. It's in that Doublehead book. Sequechee was absolutely another brother. I don't care what Wikitree says, another brother of Doublehead. He was born about 1748, about 4 years younger than Doublehead. He died about 1816. He signed a letter with his brother Doublehead and his nephew Redbird II on August 9, 1805. Doublehead had an older brother named Redbird, and Redbird II was his son. You can find that letter in that Doublehead book. And on August the 9th, Captain Addison B. Armstead of the Hiwassee Garrison specifically mentions Sequechee as Doublehead's brother. He says it's Doublehead's brother, and he wrote the letter on August 9th, 1807 after the assassination of Doublehead. So he ought to know. And he credits Sequechee with saving his life. He said, I was entirely unarmed, having lost my rifle in a crowd. A considerable number of principal men of the nation were present who were not the best trouble, would not take the least trouble to reduce the Indian to order, save one Sequechee. and he says that Sequechee was a brother of Doublehead. Sequechee also signed the Cotton Gin Treaty of January 7th of 1806, along with Doublehead, his nephew Redbird too. And that treaty placed the cotton gin at Melton's Bluff in present-day Lawrence County, Alabama. The first cotton gin I know of in the southeast was the one at Cotton Gin Port, was done in 1801. This was 5 years later. 1793, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. All right, Talontuskee, Taylor-Husky, his name is, you look at the way his name is written in a lot of different ways, but he was the son of Warte Watts and Trader John Watts. He was born about 1770 because he was a fairly young guy compared to Doublehead. And it was thought that he either occupied the house that Doublehead lived in at Blue Water, or he might have lived in the house after Doublehead's assassination. But we know that in the summer of 1808, he petitioned Thomas Jefferson to take 1,131 Cherokees from this area to Arkansas. And in January and February 1810, those petitions were approved and they became the old settlers of Cherokees West. And after his death in the spring of 1819, half brother John Jolly became chief of the Arkansas Cherokees after the death of Taylor-Husky or Talontuskee. In 1838, removal, some of the old settlers revenged the death of Doublehead by killing 70 members of the Cherokees that removed during the Trail of Tears. It was a bloodbath. The Cherokees in the east did away with blood law in 1808 at Broomtown on the Coosa River. Broome was one of the lower Cherokee chiefs. And one of the principal people that was involved in these murders was Bird Doublehead, the son. Thomas Norris Clark come to Melton's Bluff, took 21 slaves that belonged to Doublehead. Catherine Spencer says she took them. She took them back to Southwest Point. He was schooling Tassel and Bird Doublehead out of his home. He was boarding them. Doublehead was paying him like $100 a year or something like that to board his kids so they could go to school, so they could get an education. Tassel died shortly after he got back. Thomas Norris Clark gave him an old saddle, and Bird tells you in his affidavit, a sorry pony, and that's all he had to leave with, and he left and went to Arkansas and joined his people out there. But it was a mess. Let me tell you something else that Thomas Norris Clark did. John Riley, who was one of the grandsons he was the son of Samuel Riley, but he was a half-blood grandson of Doublehead. He had a section of land. John Chisholm had a section of land, and Doublehead had a section of land at Southwest Point. After the assassination of Doublehead, guess who got it? The state of Tennessee gave it to Thomas Norris Clark. Think about that. All right, Standing Turkey. Standing Turkey was an older brother. He was born about 1738. He was a nephew of Old Hop. He was chief of the nation for about 1 year during 1761. He went to England and signed the Royal Proclamation in 1763. And he was one of the party of Chickamaugans that went to St. Louis to the Spanish to get more arms and ammunition, and he was killed about 1785. This is the pictures on the Doublehead book because it's an authentic painting that was done when Standing Turkey was in England during the signing of that treaty with Henry Timberlake. Warhatchee is mentioned in the affidavit. There's a community in Lauderdale County that's called Warhatchee. It's Doublehead's younger brother and lies within the old Doublehead Reserve. Now there's not but one or two. I think there's 2 or 3 mentions in those affidavits of Warhatchee and how he was trying to get people to help finish the crop so that Doublehead's kids could have some money, because people come in there and took nearly everything they had after he was assassinated. Then there's Black Fox and Noley. Black Fox and Doublehead were friends. After the death of Little Turkey, he became chief of the Cherokee Nation from 1801 to 1811. Fox's Creek, at one time he lived at Mousetown. Edmund Saunders refers to it as Monee Town, but it was at the mouth of Fox's Creek on the present-day Morgan side of the Tennessee River. It was about 5 miles upstream from Doublehead's town. After Black Fox died in 1811, there's one guy wrote in his diary that he went to look for Doublehead's grave at Cleveland Springs. And but anyway, Fox's stand was moved from the mouth of Fox's Creek to the crossing of the River Road and the Black Warrior's Path, and he set up a store there. It was a stand, they referred to it as a stand. And I think that he was a son of Chief Black Fox. Now, some records say that he was a nephew of Black Fox. I don't go along with that. I really don't go along with that. But anyway, Coffee wrote on July 26, 1816, he went to the river at Brown's Ferry, paid the ferry, went to Black Fox's. Now this was when it was still Indian territory. You got to keep in mind, this was in July. The treaty wasn't negotiated to September. And in August again, Coffee wrote that he come to Black Fox's, brought a half, and the same day crossed the Tennessee River at Brown's Ferry. So it was about 4 or 5 miles from Brown's Ferry where this stand was located. Signed the Cotton Gin Treaty, cotton cleaning machine at Melton's Bluff. Gave Black Fox $100 for the rest of his life. And but anyway, he was in bad health because some people had to go get the money for him. He died in 1811, Black Fox did. Now that doesn't end the story of Black Fox. Black Fox, too, was also known as John Looney. He operated Fox's stand on the old Browns Ferry Road. And that's kind of repeating right there, but anyway, right here, by 1818, after this Turkeytown Treaty, John Looney goes and enters land right on the Morgan, Lawrence, and Winston County line. And in 1827, William Bill Looney, also known as Black Fox, was born in the same area. He was the 11th child of Moses and Mary Guest Looney. Now this guy is John William Looney. This guy was John W. Looney. This guy was only about 7 or 8 years old when John W. Looney bought that land in 1818. Not the same Looney. I want you to look at this guy. This is a Danville Masonic apron. Why has he got a Danville Masonic apron? I want you to look at his face. If that's not an Indian face, I don't know it. But this is an old Indian, and he was the brother of William Bill Looney that fought in the Civil War. Now, John Looney, and notice that his brother, Bill Looney, was born in the same place, in the same area where John Looney had entered land in 1818. Mary Guest, or Mary Hopper Looney, was a Cherokee Indian. She was also known as Mary Hopper. And she's buried in the Friendship Cemetery on the Lawrence County and Morgan County line. Chief John Looney stayed at Gunners, what is now present day Gunnersville, until removal in 1838, and then he was moved to western Arkansas or Oklahoma. And you can read about John Looney just by Googling his name. Okay, Bill Looney, we talked about him, aka Black Fox. Wesley Thompson did a book, Tourists of the Hills. He talks about William Walker. And he talks about breaking out 5 people at the Jasper jail. 4 of those people joined the Union Army. On December the 14th, 1863, he had about a year and 4 or 5 months left of the war. My great-grandfather, William Walker, Jr., joined the 1st Alabama Cavalry at Camp Davis, Mississippi. You documented that too, didn't you? But this is John W. Looney, the brother of Bill Looney, the Black Fox that was famous during the Civil War. The Beau Diwali, he was half Scotch, half Cherokee. He killed 13 members of the William and Alexander Scott's family. He did that in 1794, and he was kind of ostracized by the upper tribe. At the time, he also captured 21 black slaves. I really believe that these black slaves became the property of Doublehead and John Melton. Diwali, some people think he left the shoals about 1794 when he and his group killed all these people, but he did not. According to Meigs's letter on January the 22nd, 1810, to Secretary of War Chief Bowles, passports for 63 Cherokees were issued January the 10th, 1810. He goes to Texas, settles on the Neches and Sabine River. They petitioned the Texans to give them a lease of the land. They don't do it. He petitions the Mexicans and they don't do it. And Bo, he sides with the Mexicans, and Richard Fields sides with the Texans, and so Bo has him killed. And Bo was the father-in-law of Sam Houston. And Sam Houston, when he visited Sam Houston, he gave him a sash, and he gave him a coat, and he gave him a sword. And at 83 years old, he was on the battlefield fighting the Army of the Republic of Texas. When he was shot and wounded, he fell down on his knees, and a guy went up with a gun, and the others said, don't kill him, and he shot him and killed him. He died fighting for his freedom that he never got at 83 years old. All right, we can talk. I could talk a lot about Colbert. Everybody knows that Colbert lived here. He did trading in this area. And of course, that's his picture that was done by Miss Dot McDonald, who contracted with me to finish this Lauderdale County book for when he died, when Dr. William Lindsay McDonald died. Of course, she's passed away now. Okay, this is Lamar Marshall, and this is one of the most primitive places that I've seen of the old Natchez Trace in northwest Alabama. Of course, his ferry was on the Natchez Trace, and it was really initially known as Mountain Leaders Trace, crossed at the mouth of Bear Creek. And when the government was negotiated in 1801, General James Wilkinson didn't like the crossing. He said, we got to move it upriver to higher ground. So they moved it up to where Colbert's Ferry is at today, did a contract with Colbert that was going to build all this stuff. Of course, y'all know what happened to that. It didn't get all built. He got mad, but he did have a brother, Levi, that Kilpatrick Carter built a house at Buzzard Roost Spring, fell in love with his daughter Pat, and married her. So Levi Colbert gave them the house at Buzzard Roost Spring if he'd build him a house at Cotton Gin Port in Mississippi. So Carter went down there and built him a house. Carter was a big slave owner, and he did have land in that area along the Natchez Trace. If you look at the Colbert County or Old Franklin County land records, I've looked them up. Cutatoy, we've talked a little bit about Cutatoy already, and when y'all get tired, I'll quit anytime. But in 1788, he led the killboat attack on the Brown family, killing Joseph Brown's father, throwing him in the river. And the Cherokees took Jane, 2 daughters and 2 sons captive. The captive white boys of Joseph Brown was 15 at the time. The only one that stayed with the Cherokees was Joseph Brown. Joseph Brown later, when all this stuff was said and done, this is actually from the American Whig Review, March 1852. He says, Colonel Joseph Brown, a participant in the Battle of Talladega, November 9th, 1813, met Charles Butler. And Charles Butler was a mixed blood. It was with Cutatoy, and learned from him that Chief Cutatoy was still alive, living on an island near Elk River, and had with him several Negroes taken by Nickajack on the 9th of May, 1788. So he took Jackson's men, gets the men. Now, Joseph Brown became a landowner just at Boheman, I think is the name of the community, just to the west of Pulaski. He's buried in the He's buried in the cemetery right there close to Boheman. Dragon Canoe was another fierce warrior. He controlled what they call the lower towns, the Lookout Mountain Town, Running Water Town, Nickajack. Nickajack, there's a good story about Nickajack. There's a black man in the Clover Bottoms captured in 1808. His name was Jack Caville. They put him in the cave at Nickajack, and called the cave, referred to the cave as Nickajack's Cave. It got kind of corrupted to Nickajack, which is more acceptable. Crowtown and Long Island Town were in Alabama and northeast Alabama. And this is something that I love what some of these old sayings say. The Delaware tribe is only a remnant of its once great nation. Eventually the Delaware, but he said it would fade away like a snowball in the sun. He died in 1791 at a scalp dance. But anyway, that's supposedly a depiction of Dragon Canoe. Go to the next one. George Fields, important Lawrence County, Morgan County person. He had a ferry. His 2 sons run a ferry there. There was a lot of conflict between those ferries. He was highly mixed. If you'll notice, he was a son of Richard Fields, an Englishman, and Susan Emery, who was a quarter blood. He was also descended from Ludwig Grant, who was a Scotsman, and a full-blooded Cherokee woman. Richard Fields, Turtle Fields, and George Fields were sons. There's another one, Fox Fields. I'm not sure what happened to him. Turtle Fields became a Methodist preacher. But anyway, at the age of 75, George Fields died on April the 14th, 1849 in Indian Territory west of the Mississippi River. One important thing about George Fields, he was shot plumb through, and they leaned him through the chest, and he was leaned up against a big oak tree. And John Brown, the young John Brown, who was the son of the Captain John Brown, helped tote him. They carried him in a sitting position because he couldn't lay down. Brought him back to Fort Deposit, and then from there back home. And he lived, and he lived long enough that he got moved west, and he died in 1849. The Fields family, Richard Fields, his brother, entered land in Morgan County. And like I said, he had a son also named Richard Fields. And Richard Fields and Ryder Fields, I think was his name, they owned the ferry. They carried a black man to court that was trying to take over their ferry. They got the ferry back. They paid him like $2,000. The Gourd was another Gourd settlement in Lawrence County, was named after the Gourd. It became Cortland, and this is what Captain Gaines wrote: across the path leads to Showtown, eastward of the Gourd settlement, about 3 miles distance. This was done in December 1807, December the 28th, 1807. Gourd fought against the Red Stick Creeks with General Jackson. On January 12, 1818, the guide, who was named was Ray, told Ann Royal that Gourd was a very kind and knew him for 15 years. He helped subdue the Creeks. There's an island in the middle of the Tennessee River before it was flooded. It was known as Gourd Island. There's also Gourd's Landing that's north of Cortland. And let's see, in this letter dated August 15th, 1816, Gourd asked for Negro Fox to be returned to the Cherokees after the Burlesons, and evidently Negro Fox killed 2 or 3 Cherokee people. That's documented in several references. I referenced it about 4 or 5 times on different references. They were killed at Mousetown, and there was actually, at one time, Joseph Burleson owned the ferry right there, and the deed says that he sold it to George Peck. George Peck died in, I think he was one of the founders of Decatur. He died in 1828. But the landing connected Mousetown to Cow Ford Landing in present-day Limestone County. I was at the Strawberry Festival this past weekend, and there's a guy that lived right there at Cow Ford Landing. He said, "Yeah, I'm very familiar with Cow Ford Landing in Limestone County." John Gunner, I've talked about Gunnersville. Talked about it with John Looney. But when Meigs enumerated the people in 1809, he enumerated 554 inhabitants, 509 being Cherokee and 45 being white folks. Catagisky was very important in this area. He settled at Shoaltown, where Kitakaskia Creek is named after Catagisky, because Catagisky, there is the names, the way it's in print. I found all those names in print, and it's the same creek. And the chief was no different. His name was used a lot of different times. On May the 20th, 1792, there was a letter written that Chief Catagisky and the Glass. Now, Thomas Glass was an important chief. He actually became chief for just a short period of time after Doublehead was assassinated. Here's another way of spelling Catagisky. It's the same one. And John D. Chisholm was also with a bunch. And this is a letter that was, this is from Philip Hawkins, 1887, says in the year 1793, Chickamauga Cherokees had a settlement to Muscle Shoals. Doublehead and Catagisky were the chiefs. See, it's spelled a different way right there. Go on. This is a very important thing to me because I was standing in front of that building right there with Mr. Houston Cobb when I did that Black Folk Tales of the Muscle Shoals. And Houston says, my great-great-grandfather, Martin Johnson Sr., and my great-grandfather, Martin Johnson Jr., were slaves to John H. Johnson of the Green Onion Plantation. I think it's, but Catagisky lived on that hill just above the spring. The spring is right down here from this side of the house. It's just downhill. And it's the little creek is about a quarter of a mile from the mouth of Town Creek. And in the summer of 1807, while Doublehead was still alive, John Johnson, his second wife, Nancy, and I don't know if this Nancy was an Indian or not, but they leased a large tract from Doublehead just prior to his assassination. John Lamb, Lamb's Ferry, Lambs Ferry, there was an Indian trail that came right across between Brushy Creek and Sipsey River that was known as the Sipsey Trail. It went by Lost Creek, went all the way to Tuscaloosa, by Jasper and to Tuscaloosa. But anyway, the ferry was located where International Paper was located on that little road. You get past International Paper going north, and there's a sharp curve. It turns to the west. At that sharp curve, the old road goes right down and crosses the river, and where it goes into the river, there's about 3 or 4 places where it's just wore out, deep ruts. Mr. Moore, you've seen those deep ruts I've showed you before. Okay, he also signed when James Burleson and Joseph Burleson and 5 other white men killed those Cherokees. He signed the treaty right there as his name as an Indian. These Cherokee Indians killed at Mousetown. This was the Cherokee Indians gave an account of it. There are several accounts. Notice Alec Melton also signed it right there. Charles Melton also signed it right there with his ex. So they were involved. These were Indian people that were involved. Also, Lambs Ferry is noted right here leading from Cortland. Let's see, Lambs Ferry right there. Of course, Alexander McGilvery was important in this area because at one time he provided 700 Creek warriors that would follow Doublehead on the warpath. And Alexander McGilvery and Old Tassel were good friends, and Alexander McGilvery mourned when Old Tassel was assassinated. But anyway, Alexander McGilvery's father was Lackland McGilvery. He was half Scotch. Lackland goes back to Scotland. He takes Alexander McGilvery's daughter and son. Don't know what happened to them, but they went back to Scotland, but they were mixed. Pathkiller. Of course, Pathkiller is buried on the Coosa River, but at one time, the creek where Big Nance moved to was called Pathkiller's Creek. Right there's the word Pathkiller. It started in Moulton, or south of Moulton, went all the way. On October 22nd, 1813, Pathkiller informed General Jackson by letter that the creeks was taking the Muscle Shoals Path. He referred to it as the Muscle Shoals Path. The Muscle Shoals Path was also known as the Coosa Path. That Coosa Path passes right in front of my house today. Right, there's no question about it. You've seen the remnants when we went down there, where we took that deep. Yeah. That part of the Chickasaw Trail joins the Coosa Path right there by my house. That's the reason my driveway is a sunken driveway. Yeah. Okay. You remember my driveway being a sunken driveway? But anyway, it was referred to in 2 different places as one place was referred to as the Muscle Shoals Path, another place. It went to Tuscumbia Landing. What it did, it went from Dittos. It actually come from 10 Islands to Dittos, and from Dittos to Tuscumbia Landing. Tequachi, or Thomas Glass, I've already talked about Thomas Glass. He was a mixed blood Lower Cherokee. In April 1791, he forced Zachariah Cox and 31 settlers to leave the Muscle Shoals. And the area was called Cox's Island. It's south of Center Star in Lauderdale County. In 1792, he waylaid the Collins family near Nashville, killed his wife and daughter, and killed every one of them, I reckon. And then in 1801, Glass was a Lower Cherokee speaker that made a fire speech for the removal of white settlers. He wanted them out of the Cherokee territory. And then after the death of Doublehead on August 9, 1807, Glass succeeded him as head. Now, the people we're talking about actually lived in North Alabama. We're not talking about, and I could talk about Bird Doublehead. He was here. We know he was here. He said he stayed at his father's home on Blue Water Creek. In 1818, Glass led, and this is another thing, Thomas Glass and his family in 1820, some of his family in 1820 entered land in Lawrence County, but they're not found after that. They evidently moved west with him or later with him. But anyway, he had a wife and son that died en route, and he died the following year in 1819. Go to the next one. Tecumseh, this is the last one. He learned to fight with Dragon Canoe and Doublehead. And in 1810, he come through North Alabama trying to get an Indian Confederacy, and he tried to get George and Levi Colbert to join his cause, and they refused. He goes to Tukabachi in 1811, and he says, "I shall stomp the ground and the earth will shake, and you will see a fireball come out of the sky." And about that time they looked up and there was that coming. And the New Madrid quake had just happened. He come through that area, he knew it was going to shake. And the earth started shaking. Those people were in awe. So the Red Sticks joined him. That's the end of it, folks. You got any questions?